26th of March 1971 was a day like any other. I was at that time military assistant to the Chief of Army Staff. And I got up in a very leisurely fashion that because my boss, the Army Chief, was going to Bombay and returning the next day. However, by the time I got to office, reports had started coming in of the crackdown by Pakistan in what was at that time East Pakistan. During the rest of my talk, I refer to this area that used to be known as East Pakistan in Bangladesh, or the Bangladesh name nation in India. So I rang up the Army Chief in Bombay to apprise him of what had happened. And he said that he'd be starting back in the evening. Which is a good thing he did, because a little while later we got a message from PM's office saying that the PM was in Calcutta, had heard about this violence in Bangladesh, and she was also starting back to Delhi, and she'd like to be briefed in our operations group at 10 p.m. So fast forward to 10 p.m. and PM arrived in South Block, received by the Army Chief who had come in earlier from Bombay, brought to the operation group, introduced to everyone, very few people. And she asked the Army Chief to brief her. So he got up and he made mention that normally the army has to be ready to go to war at very short notice. But in this case, they had taken a few liberties because of the elections in various states in the northeast, Bengal, Assam, and so on. And most of our formations were out at that time on election duty. So the elections duties had been given to the army by the government, and the army had complied and sent formations over to help states ensure that the elections were held in a fair and prompt manner. So having told her this, he came and sat down next to her, and she said, the situation is very dire, I am under a lot of pressure to act immediately to help the Bangladeshis. So what can we do? So the answer was from the Army Chief that you haven't allowed me to employ or enroll any badbashis in my army. And so there's nothing I can do at the moment. She then spoke to him again. They were whispering to each other. We couldn't hear what was being said. But anyway, after a little while, she smiled at everyone, got up, and she said thank you to the chief and walked out, escorted by the Army Chief. The next few days were pretty hectic, reports coming in, but the great advantage we enjoyed, we learned then that we were going to also enjoy further, was that there were any number of Bangladeshi officers in the Pakistan army who were defecting and coming over to our troops and bringing with them a wealth of information. Intelligence-wise, the 1971 war was an absolute gold mine of information that we got from these people who left their posts, whatever they were occupying in the Pakistan army, and walked over to our side to give us all the information that we could want. A couple of days later, there was a call from the PM's office asking for the chief to attend a meeting of the cabinet in Parliament House. So the chief went over, attended that meeting, and later on he was telling us that it started with the PM asking each minister what his or her views were about the Pakistan breakdown. Without exception, each one of them, of the ministers that is, gave out alarming pictures of the number of refugees coming in, the mayhem which the Pakistan army was creating in Bangladesh, and ending up by saying that we must do something right away. Finally, she comes to the chief and his first comment was that, "Thank you, Prime Minister, for asking me. For one moment I thought that you were going to play Hamlet without the prince." So that caused a ripple of laughter. And then he went on to explain our dispositions, which were widely separated at that time, dispersed at that time, and because of the election. And he said that it's going to take some time for these formations to come back to their parent locations, re-equip, reintegrate with whoever has been left behind, and then proceed to the areas from where they were to commence operations. Secondly, with the rains about a month away, because in the east the rains start in early June, late May. He said that by the time we commence operation, the rains would have set in and life would be very difficult for the attacker and made incredibly easy for the defender, that is Pakistan. Then he started asking each minister, like he started with the defense minister, that I've been asking for more tanks, I've been asking for more guns, I've been asking for equipment. Then he asks, he says, "Do you realize that most of my soldiers haven't even got the pull-through to clean their rifles? They have to borrow from each other." And like that, he addressed most of the ministers about road communications, rail communications, clothing, winter clothing, and things like that. Then he says, the routes through the mountains, through the Himalayas, will be opening shortly. The snow getting cleared, things like that. And the result will be that we will also be faced with the Chinese threat, for which we will not be ready at the moment. Then finally, he tells the Prime Minister that if today we start operations, the world will assume that it is an Indo-Pak war. We are the aggressors because we started, and we are interfering in the internal affairs of Pakistan. So for all these reasons, if you want to start operations today, I can guarantee to you that there will be a defeat. If on the other hand, you allow me time to reorganize, re-equip, move, and get the various axes that we want to move on ready for operating, I can guarantee a victory. He had also mentioned earlier that if we attack at that time, immediately, there will be one axis available from Calcutta to Dhaka. He said militarily that is not at all a sound proposition. We must have at least two more axes of attack. So the two axes suggested by him, one was from Agartala, Tripura, and the other was from Shillong, the Khasi Hills. So he sat down and waited for the Prime Minister to give her decision. So her decision was, she asked all the ministers that I've heard both sides, give me some time to decide, and you'll have my orders a little later. So the ministers find out when to wait. The chief got up, went up to her table, and said, Prime Minister, would you like me to resign? I can do that on grounds of mental health or something. So she laughed and she said, Sam, of course not. You're absolutely right. And we will give you time, and you can take all the time that you want. When you're ready, let me know, and we will then commence operations. So that finished that, and we got all the time that we wanted to re-equip, reorganize, make sure that all the axes that we are going to use are ready. The hills will be blocked again, and with snow to deny the Chinese ingress. And he started then asking for the equipment that had been asked for earlier and not supplied to us. I want to make a brief mention here because lately there have been many cases of alleged corruption in importing military equipment. How did things work out those days? A meeting of secretaries would be called to decide on imports or acquisitions. He would walk in, wish them the time of the day, and start by saying that I've just been to the Prime Minister, I've got her approval to import 100 tanks, 100 guns, whatever it was, that he was looking for. And it is from so-and-so government. I now leave you to work out the details. I'll check with you after 1 week, and I want all this equipment here within 1 month. Thank you. A very good morning to you all, and he would walk out. Knowing that nobody dared go to the Prime Minister to check, have you given orders for your assent to whatever the Field Master is asking? Which of course he had. I mean, there was never any question of him asking for something off the cuff. He would check with the secretaries after a week, what is the progress? If he was unhappy, he'd tell them that without pulling any punches. And in the time frame that he had given earlier, the equipment would be in our hands and they would start distributing to the regiments, battalions, whatever. So the space of re-equipping, reorganizing carried on apace, and with it all the formation commanders were called, given the orders of where they would be operating from, which command they would be working under, what their objectives were going to be, what resources they would have, what reserves were available to meet their requirements if reserves were needed. And you would end by saying that I don't want a repeat of 65, where formations were just moved on whims and fancy. You have your orders, discuss your plans. If there are any doubts, come and sort them out with me. But once operations start, don't look back and ask for no reinforcements or whatever, because they will not be there. Another thing he highlighted always was that there will be no sacking during operation. Everyone is doing their job for the first time. Mistakes are inevitable, but don't repeat that mistake. Once you've made it, forgiven. Second time, there will be the axe. After that, he started going around to formations. The broad strategy was an attack into East Pakistan, Bangladesh, and holding operations in the West. Because he said if we go on to the offensive in the West, we lose our credibility. And what people will think that they came to us, that they are acting in an offensive manner, but here they are taking offensive action. So, all the plans made out, rehearsed, whatever the formation commanders wanted, their requirements fully met. His visits to formations units, to buck them up, all finished. And finally, in the first week of December, the three service chiefs met and wanted to know what should be the D-Day and the HR. So the 4th of December, early morning, was decided to be the day when we would commence operations against Bangladesh, against East Pakistan. Now this was kept a very closely guarded secret. It was only between the chief and the other two chiefs and the Prime Minister. Strangely, people would be very astonished to hear that now. The Defence Minister, the Jeevan Ram and was not in the picture about when we would commence operations. Nor was he told. He was away in Bangalore, and on the 2nd, I was given the job of giving to a Nello who went to Bangalore, flew to Bangalore, to wait there, and during the 9th, 3rd, 4th, to give to the Raksha Mantri, the Defence Minister, a letter from the chief saying that I have just been ordered by the Prime Minister to commence operations. You are not here, so I have given this to the orders and we will be commencing operations. We would like you to be back in Delhi to guide us towards that. Gets into his car, puts the side glasses down, into glasses, takes a drive up to Palam alone and back, then changes into a lounge suit and goes off to the overalls for it. There were many raised eyebrows at that time in the overall hotel when they see him there, knowing that we've been attacked in various places. But with a breezy, we look after them sort of announcement, he carried on, attended his party and came back. I might mention here that during the 16 days of war, 13 days of war, not on a single occasion did we have the Prime Minister or the Defence Minister question any action that had been ordered by the chief. Instead, it was always from both of them, what can we do for you? So naturally, when so much trust is placed on the shoulders of a man, it becomes his bounden duty to make sure that only the best results are produced and given to the captain.
Good evening. I'm Brigadier Sukhjit Singh, a retired Indian Army Armoured Corps officer who had been privileged to command an Indian Armoured Corps regiment in 1971 during the Indo-Pakistan conflict of 1971. I'll start at the beginning of 1971, in approximately February or March. I would put it really as the first week of March, I think, when I was then posted to Army Headquarters in the Military Operations Directorate, responsible for the planning and conduct of military operations. I was in the assignment of a Grade 2 Staff Officer, which is who operates under a Grade 1 Staff Officer and has a Grade 3 Staff Officer to assist. At that time, my directorate in which I was serving was looking after the Eastern Theatre. And my G1 or Grade 1 Staff Officer, who was my senior, was from the Grenadier Regiment, a very fine officer, Lieutenant Colonel Rising, who'd won his MVC in Sikkim earlier on, again during the confrontation with the PLA of the Chinese army. We were summoned that morning, the early part of, I think it was March, by the Director of Military Operations, General K.K. Singh, MBC. He won his MBC in the Sialkot sector in 1965, commanding the Armored Brigade of the Armored Division. He sent for us and said, when we entered his office, that had we read the newspapers. So both of us said, yes, we have. So the next question that was fired at us is, what do you make of it? And now, since I was the junior gentleman on parade at that moment, I just held my peace. And my grade 1 staff officer, Colonel Rising, in sort of a puzzled manner, turned to the Director of Operations and said, General, what are you referring to? So the General just exploded. He said, what do you think I'm referring to? It's the Indian airline hijacking to Lahore. At that time, an aircraft of the Indian Airlines had been hijacked to Lahore and was naturally had hit the headlines. So naturally we both said, this is a serious matter, and I suppose it will be dealt with politically. So the General looks up at both of us and says, well, I don't know about that, but what I want you to do, both of you to do, is by tomorrow 7 in the morning, I want a paper on a guerrilla organization which is going to operate in East Bengal against the Pakistan Army. That's all, you both can go. So we left his office slightly bewildered and quite at sea as to what was going to follow. But we both understood that something big was cooking in his mind and that he had something much deeper than he was letting on to. So we both looked at each other, and my colonel smiled at me and said, Sukhi, I'm afraid they don't teach you this in Staff College or any other institution, so we've got to use our imagination. Now we've got to work the whole night with our clerical staff and have this paper ready by 7 in the morning, which I'm glad to say, somehow or the other, we struggled through the night, and with our crew, because this was in what I term the BC era, or the before computer era, when everything was on a typewriter and had to be done manually. So our clerks managed to bash out what I thought was a very reasonable effort by the Colonel and myself to produce a sort of a paper on what the General had asked for, a guerrilla organization to operate behind Pakistan lines in East Bengal. And we were ready with the paper when the General arrived at 7 in the morning. After a short while, he rang the bell and summoned the G1 and myself. We went into his office, sat down, and there he was sitting at his table with his red pencil in hand, and flipping through each page. Starting with page 1, every page he ran his red pencil through and said, rubbish, who's written this nonsense, and stuff like that. And as this went on, he had to go through some approximately 30 pages which we had produced with a couple of appendices. And so my colonel was looking rather a bit disappointed and a bit unhappy, because every page the General was running his red pencil through it and saying, nonsense, this won't do, it's not good enough. Anyhow, before he finished the paper, he said, all right, you both can go. So we both walked out, and the Colonel looked at me and said, well, I don't think he's very happy with what we've done, but then at least he could have said thank you. I said, don't worry, sir. He's not going to miss a single point. He's noted everything that we put in the paper, and he's now going to put it in his own words. So the Colonel looked at me and said, how do you know that? I said, quite simple, sir. I was his brigade major in 65, so I know how he works. said, all right, let's see. And sure enough, when the paper was redone later on, it was written entirely by the Director of Operations himself, General K.K. Singh, in precise military prose. And he had managed to put everything within about 12 pages, 10 or 12 pages. That shows the clarity of mind that was being brought to bear on the problem and the strategic level of his thought, because he didn't miss a single point that we put in our somewhat prolix paper. That having been said, now the paper was then, this is the paper that formed the basis of a paper to the Chiefs of Staff Committee on what should be done in East Bengal. And we realized, to our surprise, that we were now looking at an image that was beginning to emerge of a plan being evolved for the severance of East Pakistan or from West Pakistan. In other words, the two wings of Pakistan, which were separated by about 1,800 kilometers directly of Indian territory, were going to be separated with this military plan that was being evolved. And I think I would like to recount here too that a person to whom we owed a very great debt of gratitude in the planning stages was the Director of Naval Operations, or the DNO, a remarkable naval officer by the name of then Captain O. Dawson, who later became Chief of the Naval Staff. Very fine officer, very sharp, very quick on the uptake, and with a very, very broad perspective. The classified document was then handed over either to the Chief, then General Manekshaw, personally in his office, by the officer carrying them, or it would be handed over to his military advisor, his MA, then Brigadier Depinder Singh, later General Depinder Singh. As the plan was gradually formulated bit by bit and began to take shape, the necessary instructions to all concerned, that is the field formation of the Indian Army from Army Headquarters, emanated from our directorate. But while talking about specialized duties, I think a certain incident would amuse our listeners, because one of the things was that Director of Military Operations, General K.K. Singh, was thinking of allotting as a task to a guerrilla element operating in East Bengal was to start underwater or naval operations at their own level, at the guerrilla level. Now, I wasn't authorized to brief the Director of Naval Operations, but I was told that I should keep him in the loop vaguely up to a certain level. So this information I had to pass on to him when he came to my office one day, just walking past. And since I had a number of other people in the office, I didn't quite know, and the Director of Naval Operations was proceeding to a naval station thereafter. I had to speak to him before he left. So the point was how to get this information across to him. So I started talking to him and chatting him up about his trips to Europe when he was with the Navy. And I said, I'm sure, Captain Dawson, you enjoy French cuisine. So he looked at me and he realized that something was afoot. So he says, what sort of cuisine? I said, what was your favorite dish in France? So he recited a few dishes, chicken, meat, this, that, and the other. I didn't react. Then I said, can't you think of something very, very special? Then he said, yes, frogs. I nodded very vigorously. He got the message immediately. And he said, Yes, frogs. I've got it. Thank you. I'm going to have a dinner in my house one day, and you will be invited. The message being conveyed to him is that he had to start training frogmen, underwater specialists, who could destroy naval ships by putting explosives on the bottom of the ship, attaching it to the steel hull of the ship and letting it blow with a timing device. He got that immediately, which shows how sharp the Navy was in picking up the hints that were dropped for their training. And they did a remarkable job in East Bengal at their own level and within their own service, as did the Air Force, who assumed complete control and air superiority over the Eastern Theatre and assisted the Army totally in its unqualified victory in East Bengal. If I recall correctly, it would be about September of 1971 that I was promoted to take command of my regiment, which was located at that time in central India, at Babina Cantonment, which is one of our very large Armored Corps cantonments in central India. Anyhow, we used the Babina ranges to good effect by zeroing all our tank guns, which means getting all the guns so correctly adjusted and calibrated so that they would hit the designated target correctly. All that was being done by all the regiments involved. And then we were given orders that we had to move north. That's all we were told, move north. Now, north could be anywhere in India. So it's only much, much later that just before the move we were told where our destination was. And it had to be done by stages. The tank columns started moving by rail, and that in itself was a Herculean job completed by the Indian Railways in record time. These military specials were run on white-hot priority. Nothing came in the way of stopping them unless it was an absolute emergency. And when I led my regimental column into Pathankot, I was told that it was about 2 in the morning, I think, that we reached the outskirts of Pathankot, having staged from Jalandhar onwards. I was told that we had to be deployed immediately. My regiment, which was one of the leading regiments, had to be deployed immediately to prevent a Pakistan preemptive thrust across the Ravi River. So I asked the officer who was the advance party commander, Major Yudhvir Singh Kamar. I said, Yudhvir, where are we to go? He says, a place called Dinanagar. So I said, where is that? He said, I don't know, sir, I haven't got a map. Now here we were stuck lined up in a column along the road, about almost 100 vehicles, wondering where this wretched place Dinanagar was. Just then a Dudwala milkman went by with his cans of milk on either side of his bicycle. So I grabbed him. I said, where is Dinanagar? So he said, I'm going there. No, thi ja rahe hain. So I said, hang on, don't move. I said, you go in front and I'll follow with my whole regiment. I followed the Dudwala. Luckily, he had a slightly automated bike. It had a small engine on it. And so he moved quite at a reasonable pace. And we got to Dinanagar. And that was how my regiment found itself entering a war zone behind a milkman. So there's not always seriousness in war. War is not always a very serious business. You do get some comic errors in between, and this was one of them. And so my regiment was almost constantly on the alert. Our tanks were dismounted at the other end, and ammunition which was carried loose was stowed in the tanks. It was a major undertaking because it has to be opened up from the packing, it has to be degreased in some cases, cleaned, put into the ammunition racks of the tanks. And all this has to be done within a certain time limit. So you can imagine that the men were at it from morning till night. And all machine gun ammunition using a hand crank had to be belted or put into a belt so that the machine gun was belt fed by a belt in which these rounds are embedded. So to load that, it had to be done on a machine. That in itself took a long time. So it was not just all fun and games the other end. There was a lot of very hard work to be done. You can say the war really started on the 3rd of December 71, when the Pakistan Air Force attacked all our airfields in that sector, in the Punjab, and right up to, I think they even penetrated up to Agra. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly. But certainly all the Western Theatre Indian Air Force airfields were attacked by the Pakistani Air Force. This was on the 3rd, and hostilities were declared shortly thereafter. But we went into action actually on the 9th of December. So unless you know where these are, you are working more or less blind. And on my battle map, the tactical battle map that I had 5 minefields marked. One was the Research and Analysis Wing, Central Government Intelligence Agency. Then there was the Intelligence Bureau minefield, which is again an intelligence agency run by the Government of India. Then there's the Military Intelligence minefield marked. Then the Western Command minefield. And my formations minefield. So 5 minefields were marked there. Eventually, when I briefed my crews and was training my regiment, I realized that this was all speculative. We really had no confirmed knowledge. So we decided to think as a regiment, as an actual regiment, where would we put our minefield? And the only blank space on that map was so small that we put our minefield in that blank space. None of these proved in the event to be correct, because the Pakistani minefields were totally unexpected and very extensively and well laid. And they did impose a lot of caution on the advancing elements of one corps. Earlier on, they'd been, during the training phase, been walking barefoot across this track, which had been marked by the engineers, because we had lowered the water level at the Madhapur headworks to an acceptable level, which is up to about roughly medium fording. And the tanks went through with only the driver's hatch above water. And they didn't ship any water. But to follow that track, the men, especially the drivers, the commanders, and the spare crewman who was guiding each tank, had to do it on foot a number of times at night. And that water, when we used to go through it, was up to our necks for medium fording roughly. And it was icy cold. So the only thing that kept them going was cases of rum the other side. That you get across and come back, we give you a case of rum. That sorted the problem of cold and icy cold water.
I am Brigadier P.K. Ghosh, VRC VSM, commissioned in the Corps of Signals. As you will recall, 2 corps had commenced raising sometime in, I think, April or May under General Tapi Raina at Krishnanagar. Forces were being moved, war-like stores had been moved, everything was under preparation, and I couldn't be sure, but we were told that the Chief of the Army Staff wanted the monsoons to be over and the water in the rivers to recede a little bit, and that's the right time to start campaigning. That's what we were waiting for.
The war clouds had been gathering. Punjab had been put under President's rule, and I was ordered to take over Ferozepur district, which I did on 1st of September 1971, almost exactly 3 months before the start of the war. Ferozepur was then the biggest district area-wise in Punjab, out of which now I think 4 or 5 districts have been formed. So it was a tall order to get to know the huge district, to get to know the people, to get to know the officers and the field officers in the 5 subdivisions of the district, to get to know army formations. And let me say that there were 4 army divs in my district. Probably the maximum army that a deputy commissioner may have seen. The 1st Armored Div was there. Under General Fremantle, the 7th Div was there, which used to shift to Khemkar, but the Husainiwala Bridge used to remain with the 7th Div. 4 Div in the Mamdot area, 14 Div, and then the Foxtrot sector under General Ram Singh. So going and meeting all formations, building an equation with all of them, it was like running all the time, and it was at the same time a pleasure meeting such high officers of the army, and because they are the best in the force, so it was learning also at the same time. There were instructions from the government also, which, let me say, as a field officer, some of them I felt was out of synchronization with the situation on the ground. For example, we'd been told not to dig trenches because that demoralized the population. I knew I would have nobody to dig them up, so I had them dug up beforehand. Then there was another instruction not to keep your family, not to let your families go. That was, I think, not possible. I decided to tell my officers to send off their families because when the war starts, I wanted all of them all the time. And I spoke to the commissioner, Conwar Surinder Singh Bedi, with whom I had worked in 1965 war in Amritsar, and he was readily agreed with me that yes, I can do that. Evacuation plans had to be sorted out, they had to be rehashed, we did all that. And then all kinds of other help. We never said no to the army. For example, brigade commander at Fazilka, he wanted an effective anti-tank ditch dug. The present one he thought was not enough. He wanted to extend it. So we had an excellent SDM there, Mr. K.C. Mahajan. He got people together, got them to pool the funds, got them to pool the machinery, and we dug up, in the army language, an effective anti-tank ditch, 900 meters long. So all this only with the intention to do whatever we can for the army. Another aspect was the entertainment. Brigadier Chaudhary had asked me that his people need entertainment at Fazilka because there was a cinema which had got burnt. I called the cinema owner and I said, I will permit you to hold 2 shows, one for your own good and the other for the army. He agreed. And when the first show was to be organized, Brigadier Chaudhary invited me to come. I had a very good equation with the then SSP, Mr. Ravikant Sharma. So I used to take him with me everywhere, and he was very willing to be with me in those times, very trying times. We had gone to Fazilka and were in the cinema inaugurating the show. When the war actually started, we heard sounds of explosions, ran out. We were interrupted by the local BSF commandant. I forget his name. But what appalled me was that he had his kitchen utensils in a gunny bag in the back of his official jeep. He came out and he took us to the fence of the SDM's residence, and he said, the Pakistanis are going to come from this direction, and Fazilka is going to fall today. We were alarmed. We went immediately to the brigade headquarters, and we were sitting with them. And about the dusk time, when I was still sitting with brigade commander, one JCO comes running. He reported to the brigade commander, sir, the Pakistanis have come onto the Ferozepur road. That's my district headquarters, which means my district headquarters was cut. By the way, I want to say that I stayed on Fazilka because on the very first night, the bridge on the Satluj at Fazilka, Hussainiwala, got blown up. So Ferozepur, in my opinion, was safe. And I therefore stayed in the critical period of the first 2 days when Fazilka was attacked.